We all know what happens with the team that wins the national championship. They get all the glory, attention, and money, which ultimately helps keep the program stable and competing at a high level for many years after. But what happens to the team that comes up just short? Because that often gets swept under the rug. We've seen these teams go get their redemption, and we've also seen them get embarrassed during the following season. In order to understand the implications of coming in second, we must look at the recent history. Today, I'm going to evaluate the last decade of runner-ups in the season after they lost the title. And at the end, I'll have a tally of how many teams actually lived up to expectations and how many teams crumbled or fell off. The number may surprise you. Is the curse of number 2 a real thing or just made up sports lore? Plus, I'll talk about Notre Dame as well. All right, for our question of the day, let's make it a little more intellectual than usual. If you could rewrite the history of college football and choose any of these runner-ups to win it, who would it be? If you love college football, feel free to subscribe so you never miss out on another upload. We are going to own the offseason. After Oregon got stomped on against Ezekiel Elliott and Ohio State in the inaugural CFP National Championship, it was time for the post-Mariota era. Going into 2015, the Ducks also had 10 other players get drafted and brought in FCS transfer quarterback Vernon Adams from Eastern Washington. The Ducks were very shaky, going 3-3 in their first 6 games with an embarrassing 62-20 loss in Autzen to Utah. From there, they got hot, winning the next 6 games to close out the regular season, but the year ended on the worst note possible in the Alamo Bowl against TCU, where Oregon notoriously blew a 31-0 lead. After their title run, the Ducks went 9-4. Finishing 19th in the polls. Clemson fell to Alabama in a heartbreaking 45-40 loss, but came roaring back in 2016. Losing only 3 players to the draft, their core was returning. Led by Deshaun Watson and Mike Williams, Clemson was only 1 play away from being perfect in the regular season, as they lost to Pitt in early November. But that one loss did not kill them because they still made the playoffs as a 2 seed, routing Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl 31-0 and getting their revenge against Alabama, with Watson finding Hunter Renfrow for the game-winning touchdown as the clock expired. A textbook way to bounce back. A 14-1 season, along with the Tigers' first national championship since 1981. Now it was Nick Saban's Alabama Crimson Tide who had something to prove after coming up just short. Jalen Hurts was going to be much more poised as a sophomore in 2017, alongside weapons like Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, and Henry Ruggs. The Tide looked unstoppable through 11 games, but lost the Iron Bowl finale against their hated rivals Auburn, causing them to miss the SEC championship game. Luckily, they still got a berth in the playoffs as a 4 seed. Then they played number 1 Clemson in the semifinal and burned the Tigers 24-6. Finally, we all remember the famous moment in the national championship game against Georgia where Hurts was benched for freshman Tua in the crazy overtime win. This was the best natty in CFP history. 2018, you wish this is where I would say that Georgia kicked off their dynasty with Coach Kirby Smart, but the Bulldogs weren't quite ready for that yet. They made it to the SEC championship game with an 11-1 record and had a chance to reach the playoffs. All they had to do was beat Bama. In the third quarter, it looked like the Dogs had it, leading by a score of 28-14, but they ended up blowing it. Georgia went on to lose their Sugar Bowl New Year's 6 game to Texas, going 11-3 on the year. Although it wasn't the revenge they wanted, it was still a memorable season for quarterback Jake Fromm and running back DeAndre Swift. Plus, the best was yet to come for Kirby Smart. Alabama was destroyed by Clemson 44-16 in the 2018 title game, and it felt like a non-negotiable that Saban would be in the 2019 playoffs to get his lick back. But the Tide season was troubled by injuries, including losing Tua in early November. Regardless, Bama was still in a great position to reach the CFP, but they were defeated by Auburn in the Iron Bowl. The 48-45 loss caused Alabama to miss the playoffs for the first time since expansion. Although Bama won their consolation prize in the Citrus Bowl against Michigan, the 11-2 season felt like a major disappointment. That just goes to show you how elite Saban was during that era. Clemson got a tough draw in the 2019 national championship facing the legendary Joe Burrow LSU team, and it felt like they would be there back again in 2020. It was the final season of Trevor Lawrence before he'd take off for the draft, and there were guys around him on offense like Travis Etienne and Amari Rodgers. But the Achilles heel of this team was their defense, and it showed in their 2 losses on the year. First, when they came up short against Notre Dame in double overtime, 47-40, and in the Sugar Bowl CFP semifinal facing Ohio State. The Buckeyes put up 49 on Clemson's head to win it and send the Tigers home. Following a humbling loss to Alabama in the 2020 title game, Ohio State's 2021 season got much worse. In week 2, they lost in the shoe to Oregon, which was a massive upset, and yeah, they had an impressive 11-2 record overall, but they lost the most important game of them all. Even with an elite offense led by CJ Stroud and Jackson Smith-Njigba, it was the first time in a decade that Michigan beat OSU, spoiling the Buckeyes' playoff hopes. They had to sit at home and watch the Wolverines play in the Big Ten title game, win it, and get a crack at Georgia in the semifinal. The Bucs still got to play in the Rose Bowl game as a consolation and gave us one of the most memorable non-CFP bowls in recent history against Utah. Most famously, Smith-Njigba had a game for the ages with 347 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns in a 48-45 win. After losing to Georgia in the 2021 title game, Alabama remained a powerhouse with the preseason rank of number 1 in 2022, but struggled in close games, and that was to their demise. Their first loss of the year was in Knoxville, a legacy game from Hendon Hooker in Tennessee, where the Vols won on a last-second field goal 52-49, and Neyland was on fire. The Tide got shafted once again in Baton Rouge a few weeks later against LSU in overtime after Jaden Daniels outplayed Bryce Young, and the Tigers won on a 2-point conversion. Bama finished at 11-2 with a dominant win over number 9 Kansas State in the New Year's 6 Sugar Bowl, but with the talent on this roster, their ceiling was much higher. This 2022 team was just a few hairs away from competing for another natty. The one-hit wonder TCU Horned Frogs. The 65-7 2022 natty loss to Georgia should have been a sign. Somehow the Frogs started 2023 ranked at 17, even after losing 8 players to the draft, including their heart and soul quarterback Max Duggan. In the season opener, they famously lost to Colorado at home in Deion Sanders' debut, a game that started the Buffs' hype train. From there, they never saw the rankings again and looked horrible in Big 12 play, going 3-6, which spoiled their shot at making a bowl. A year removed from playing on the biggest stage, TCU went 5-7. This one was less of a shocker than TCU underperforming. After Washington lost against Michigan in the 2023 Natty, there was a mass exodus in the program. First, head coach Kalen DeBoer took the money and went to Tuscaloosa. Then 10 Husky players were drafted, including their heart and soul, Michael Penix Jr. and Roma Dunze, and to cap it off, 15 players left in the portal. Brand new head coach Jed Fish from Arizona was not expected to have a great year in 2024, as the Huskies were chosen as 10th in the Big Ten preseason media poll. They performed exactly how people expected, reaching a bowl game on a mediocre 6-7 season with some tough losses, including one in Seattle to their rival Washington State early in the year. This story's obviously still being written. It's Notre Dame going into the 2025 season. The Irish are set to return their elite running back Jeremiah Love, plus the offensive line is going to have plenty of depth. On the defensive side, the linebacking core will be coming back as well, guys such as Jalen Sneed. The big question is who will take over for Riley Leonard at QB. Many believe it'll be Steve Angeli, who has been waiting his turn as backup for a while. Angeli stepped into the semifinal against Penn State and held his own, looking very mature out there. Overall, Notre Dame is in a great spot to compete in 2025. You can look at almost every expert way too early top 25 and it's consensus that Notre Dame's top 10. The Irish hope not to follow in the footsteps of many other teams on this list. After evaluating everything, only 2 of the last 10 runner-ups reached the title game in the following season and lived up to the high expectations that were set. Out of the other 8 teams, 5 of them had 11 wins or more, which on the surface seems great, but remember, these were highly touted natty or bust programs. The other 3 teams we can say considerably fell off, starting with 2014 Oregon, which was the least catastrophic drop-off, followed by 2023 Washington, then of course, the worst of them all, 2022 TCU. I'll say this to end it. With the age of transfer portal and NIL, I think fast drop-off is more likely to happen than it did in the last decade. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. I've been Saturday Shenanigans, your home for unfiltered college football content, and I'll see you guys soon.